So many new speaker amps are going compact, affordable, and Class D. These aren't. The Burson Timekeeper Voyagers are using old school principles with a whole lot of new school technology. These are headed to the cost no object end of the market, so we should have very high expectations for their sonic performance. However, when I first received the Burson Timekeeper Voyagers from Burson Audio, there was a problem. I looked at the information available online about the Timekeeper GT3s that I'd been using and the newer version Timekeeper GT4s that I hadn't tried but I knew about, and then compared that to the Burson Timekeeper Voyagers, and it all looked the same. You can buy the lower level Timekeeper GTs with the same power control chips, the same discrete op amps, even the same fusion core power supplies as you get with the Voyagers. The Timekeeper GT4s even come with the same EXICON MOSFET transistors that are used in the Voyagers. They look identical on paper. I had to immediately email Burson because something didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense that the Timekeeper Voyagers sounded so much better than Timekeeper GTs. Sure, the EXICON MOSFETs are really nice. I've heard there have been multiple amplifiers now, but those alone couldn't explain why what I was hearing from the Timekeeper Voyagers was so much better than from the GT3s. The Timekeeper GT3 was less refined and less smooth than the Voyager. Amos Lee's vocals in Seen It All Before were a bit edgier and a little bit harsher from the Timekeeper GT3. And then on top of that, the sibilants were more sibilant. That means that sounds like s and t were more aggressive. And then there was the imaging. From the GT3, there was less precision and focus. From the Timekeeper Voyager, the image was precise and lifelike. There was clearly more going on than I could tell from the webpage. Thankfully, the explanation email from Burson set everything right. Remember I said before that Burson are staying old school with the Timekeepers? What I meant by that is that these are proper Class A amplifiers. And to achieve that, they have to be fairly large. To prevent them from getting too large though, they've created this very cool case, and the casework allows the use of low-speed fans with these rear-firing vents. You don't hear the fans thanks to the new case design and these rear-firing vents, but having them allows the Timekeeper Voyager to stay in Class A mode without getting too big or getting too hot. The internal power supply circuitry on the Voyager is also upgraded over the GT3, and that will no doubt be contributing to the sound quality improvements as well. And to be clear, the differences I heard between the GT3 Timekeeper and the Voyager version Timekeeper weren't massive, but they were clearly obvious. The Timekeeper GT3s were already the second best amplifier that I'd ever used. They were second only to the Enleum AMP-23R, and we'll come back to that one shortly. Before I do though, I've got a quick favour to ask. At the time that I was putting together this video, Passion for Sound was almost at 50,000 subscribers. And so firstly, thank you. I'm deeply grateful to all of you who are already subscribed. I noticed the other day though, that 67.5% of viewers of my channel aren't subscribed. And so I have a favour to ask. If you're enjoying this video, or if you've enjoyed other videos of mine recently, then please hit the subscribe button. If each of you who are not yet subscribed were to hit that subscribe button, it's going to launch the channel rapidly towards 100,000 subscribers. It costs you nothing, and you can always unsubscribe in the future if you find that you no longer need my videos. And so thanks to everybody who's already subscribed, and thanks to everybody who just clicked the button. It means a lot. And now back to the Voyager. We'll get to some more sonic comparisons in just a moment, but before we do, I want to cover off just a few other important details. The Timekeeper Voyagers can be bought in two different bundles. Both bundles include a pair of Timekeeper Voyagers because they're a monoblock, so you need one for the left and one for the right. But where the bundles differ is that you can buy the Voyagers either with the standard supercharger power supply, that's $4,999 for that bundle, or you can go for the best sounding option and get them with the fusion core power supplies for $5,999. It might seem a lot to spend $1,000 to get upgraded power supplies for amplifiers, but they retail separately for $1,600. So you're making a $600 saving if you buy them all together. And on top of that, they're a significant sonic upgrade over the already excellent supercharger supplies. I'll pin a video at the end of this one so you can learn all about the Fusion Core power supplies if you're interested, but the short version is that they're using a gallium nitride based design, and that allows for ultra fast switching of a switch mode power supply, which means they're going to push any possible switching noise well outside the audible band, and that theoretically improves the sound quality. As I said, if you want to know a bit more about how they compare to the superchargers, watch the video I'm going to pin at the end. The other details to know about the Voyagers are that they are a Class A design, as I've already mentioned, and that's as opposed to the Class AB design used by the Timekeeper GT3s. Without going into a deep dive here because it's a video all of its own, Class A designs are less efficient than Class AB designs, which means they're going to get hotter, but they're also often considered to sound better because there's no switching between transistors. In Class AB, you've got different transistors and you're switching the signal between them depending on what state the signal's in. As I said, it's a complex topic for a different video, but the point being Class A is generally considered to be better because you're not bouncing back and forth between transistors. Every time you're switching between transistors, you'd be introducing potentially noise and distortion, and so if you can stick to the one transistor, it's less efficient, but you're not getting the noise and distortion. And so getting back to just the Voyager, the last couple of specs we need to talk about here is that these will output 100 watts into 8 ohm speakers. So that's 100 watts on the left, 100 watts on the right. Or if you've got 4 ohm speakers, they'll output 200 watts. They can also accept XLR or RCA inputs, and in addition to being able to switch between which input you're using, you can also switch between the gain modes. Low gain mode operates at 0 dB, in other words it doesn't boost the volume at all from what comes from your preamp, or you can switch to high gain mode where you'll get 6 decibels extra on the RCA and 12 decibels extra on the XLR input. And so when you start to factor in the Class A design and the power output of these, it's actually pretty impressive that they've stayed as small as they are. Knowing that the Voyagers sounded better than the Timekeeper GT3s meant that I was already impressed by them, but what I really wanted to know was whether or not they could take it to the Enleum AMP-23R. The AMP-23R is a very different kind of amp. It's smaller, it's less powerful, it's got an integrated volume control, and it's got a fantastic headphone output. It also costs $6,500, so it's even more expensive than the premium bundle of the Voyagers. However, the AMP-23R's ability to produce a lifelike and precise image from a pair of efficient or near-field speakers is absolutely magnificent. That sense of realism and imaging is what's consistently kept the AMP-23R as my primary speaker amp of choice. It's not as good in a large room or with very demanding speakers, but in a desktop or near-field setup like mine, it's absolutely fantastic. In other words, the Voyagers were in for a real challenge. Had they closed the gap now, or was the AMP-23R still king? Straight away, the Timekeeper Voyagers impressed. It seemed like the imaging was about as good as it could possibly get. That was coming from the Chord M-Scaler, the Chord Dave, and the Burson Soloist Voyager headphone amp and preamp. I was running Transcendence XLR cables from the Dave to the Soloist Voyager, a set of Kimber XLR cables from the Soloist to the Timekeepers, and then a set of Tellurium Q Black version 2 speaker cables from the Voyagers up to the Proac Response D2R speakers. And the tonality of the guitar in Whiskey and You was nothing short of marvellous from the Voyagers with those Proac Response D2R speakers. Strums and plucks of the guitar were clean and crisp, but there was excellent resonance and weight to the sound as well. And then there were the dynamics. The Voyagers maintained a sense of control and energy from the quietest moments to the loudest moments of each track. It was hard to imagine things getting much better. Swapping to the Enleum did reveal some differences though. The Enleum resolved some of the finest details a little bit more and a little bit better than the Voyagers could. It seemed to be just a tiny bit more transparent than the Voyager. On the other hand, the Voyager sound could be described as more refined and a little bit smoother than the Enleum. Yes, you probably get just a little bit more texture from the Enleum, but brighter systems and poorer recordings might not be quite as enjoyable from the Enleum. I also noticed that the Voyager brought more sense of weight and focus to the central image, and so vocals or lead instrumentals tended to have a bit more presence in the mix from the monoblocks. In some ways, the Voyagers reminded me of a great R2R DAC presentation, as opposed to more of a great Delta Sigma presentation from the Enleum AMP-23R. In other words, the Voyagers are a little bit more relaxed and a little bit smoother without lacking detail. The Enleum leans into clarity and detail, but could be a little bit less relaxing as a result. That, of course, is going to depend on the rest of your system, the room it's in, and your tastes. Where before I had a clear preference for the Enleum AMP-23R, now things weren't so clear. Now, I would decide between these two based on a few other factors. And we're going to ignore the headphone output because that's a really clear differentiator. If you need a headphone output, the Voyagers can't do that. Focusing on these instead as just pure speaker amps, I'd start by considering whether or not you want absolute extreme transparency, or if you're after a slightly smoother sound. Next, I'd consider how much power you need. With the Enleum capable of just 45 watts into 4 ohm loads, it's not going to suit large rooms or difficult speakers. The Voyager, on the other hand, will handle large rooms and or difficult speakers with ease. And then if power isn't really an issue for you, then the next thing to think about is size and convenience. You need to think about whether you prefer to have the volume control built into the amplifier, like on the AMP-23R, or if you just want a power amp because you've already got your volume control via your DAC or a preamp. And then add to that whether or not you want to have a single box doing everything, or if it's okay for you to have two separate speaker amp boxes. The Voyagers are equipped with 12 volt trigger input and output, so it's very easy to have them switch on from your DAC, your streamer, or your preamp. Just run a 12 volt lead to the first Voyager and then run another 12 volt lead from the first Voyager to the second. And so it's really more about whether or not you've got the space to put two Voyager amps and of course then a couple of power points to plug them into. If you do have the space and the power points and the desire to have a couple of boxes driving your speakers, then the Voyagers are going to reward you with world-class sound. The upgrade from the Timekeeper GT3s to the Timekeeper Voyagers is significant. It's lifted the performance of the Timekeeper range to a new level of performance. These are now more than ever a premium, transparent, and refined sounding speaker amp. In fact, I'd be shocked if anyone didn't find the sound very enjoyable from these when they're paired up with an excellent source chain and an excellent set of speakers. If that sounds like the sort of speaker amp that you're looking for, I put some links in the description down below so you can go and read up on them for yourself. And don't forget that if you want to know more about the Fusion Core power supplies versus the supercharger power supplies and why the Fusion Cores bring the Voyager Timekeepers to life, then watch the video that I've pinned here at the end where I explain it all in detail. For now though, a huge thanks to YouTube channel members, also to channel Patreon members, and of course to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.